The massive crystalline towers of the Kythera homeworld stood like frozen lightning against the purple sky. For thousands of years, these beautiful structures had reached toward the stars, housing one of the galaxy's most peaceful civilizations. The Kythera were artists and philosophers, beings who had never known war. Their crystal cities hummed with gentle music, and their technology worked in harmony with nature. But now those same towers were cracking like broken glass. The Vorthak swarm had arrived 3 days ago. Nobody really knew where they came from, originally. Some said they were from the dark space between galaxies. Others believed they were weapons created by an ancient war that had gone terribly wrong. What everyone did know was simple. Wherever the Vorthak appeared, everything died. Creatures looked like a nightmare made real. They were part insect, part machine, part something else entirely. They moved in perfect coordination, like a single massive organism with millions of parts. Their ships weren't built, they were grown. Living metal that pulsed with alien heartbeats. Weapons that fired streams of acid that could eat through anything. Commander Lee Hanna was drinking her morning coffee aboard the exploration ship Iron Resolve when the first distress signal came through. She nearly dropped her cup when she heard the transmission. The voice was beautiful, like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, but it was filled with terror. "Please, anyone who can hear this message," the Kythera voice said in broken standard language. "Our world is dying. We have never hurt anyone. We have no weapons, we have no armies, please help us." Hanna had been in space for 15 years. She had seen pirates, smugglers, and even a few small wars, but she had never heard such pure desperation. In anyone's voice, the Kythera weren't soldiers or politicians. They were just people who wanted to live. She called up the sensor readings. The Kythera system was 47 light-years away from their current position, too far to see directly, but their long-range scanners could detect the energy signatures of massive destruction. Something terrible was happening there. "Navigation Officer Park Jimin, get over here," she called out. Jimin was young, maybe 25 years old, with quick hands and an even quicker mind. He had joined the exploration service because he wanted to see new worlds, not because he wanted to fight wars, but right now his face was pale as he looked at the sensor data. "Commander, I'm picking up similar distress calls from 17 different Kythera colonies," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "The signals are getting weaker every hour. I think entire worlds are going silent." Hanna felt something cold settle in her stomach. 17 worlds. That meant millions of innocent beings were dying, while she stood here drinking coffee. The Galactic Council should have been handling this. They had massive fleets, thousands of ships and resources that a single exploration vessel could never match. The Council had been formed specifically to deal with threats like this. Every member species contributed ships and personnel to protect the galaxy's peaceful civilizations, but Hanna knew how the Council worked. She had dealt with them before. Everything had to go through committees. Every decision had to be approved by representatives from dozens of different species. Even ordering toilet paper for their space stations took 3 weeks of paperwork. Captain Kim Taiho emerged from his quarters, still putting on his uniform jacket. Taiho was in his 40s, with gray starting to show in his black hair. He had served in the Earth Defense Force before joining the Exploration Service. Unlike Hanna, he had seen real combat. "What's the situation?" he asked, looking at the displays. "The Kythera are under attack by something called the Vorthak swarm," Hanna reported. "Multiple colonies are going dark. They're sending distress calls on every frequency." Taiho studied the data for a long moment. His expression grew darker as he read the reports. "Any response from the Galactic Council?" "I checked the emergency channels," Jimin said. "The Council received the first distress calls 3 weeks ago. They're still forming committees to study the situation." 3 weeks. Hanna felt sick. For 3 weeks, the Kythera had been dying while politicians argued about jurisdiction and protocol. "Sir, we're the only vessel in range," Jimin continued, his voice tight with urgency. "The nearest Council fleet is 6 months away, assuming they actually decide to send one." Taiho stared at the burning system displayed on their screens. The regulations were clear. Exploration vessels were not military ships. They were supposed to observe, report, and wait for proper authorization before taking any action. Getting involved in combat situations without council approval could result in court-martial, but protocol hadn't saved a single Kythera life. The captain was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Hana could see the conflict in his eyes. He was a good officer who followed orders, but he was also a good man who couldn't ignore innocent people crying for help. Finally, Taiho spoke. Set course for the Kythera system. Maximum burn. The iron resolve dropped out of hyperspace with a flash of blue light, and immediately everyone on the bridge knew they had arrived in hell. Captain Kim Taiho had seen a lot of terrible things during his years in space. He had witnessed the aftermath of pirate raids, the destruction left by natural disasters, and the scars of old wars. But nothing had prepared him for what lay before them now. The Kythera system was dying. Where there should have been the gentle purple glow of inhabited worlds, there was only darkness punctuated by the red fire of destruction. 3 of the system's 5 planets were completely dark, their surfaces stripped bare of all life. The remaining 2 worlds flickered with the last gasps of civilization fighting for survival. But it wasn't the dead planets that made everyone on the bridge hold their breath in horror. It was what moved between them. The Vorthak ships looked like someone had taken nightmares and given them physical form. They weren't built like normal spacecraft with clean metal lines and geometric shapes. Instead, they looked grown, like massive tumors floating through space. Their hulls pulsed with veins of sickly green light, and tentacle-like appendages reached out from their surfaces, grabbing debris and pulling it into gaping mouths, lined with what looked like teeth. "My God," whispered Navigation Officer Park Jimin. His hands were trembling as he tried to update their position charts. "How many of them are there?" Sensor Specialist Choi Minho was hunched over his console, his face pale in the blue glow of his displays. Minho was usually calm and professional, but right now his voice shook as he called out the readings. "I'm counting 47 capital bioforms," he said quietly. "Each one is bigger than our largest battleships, and there are thousands of smaller creatures swarming around them. Sir, our weapons won't even scratch something that size." The Iron Resolve was an exploration vessel, not a warship. They had basic defensive systems and a few light weapons for dealing with pirates or dangerous wildlife, but nothing that could challenge a fleet of this magnitude. It would be like trying to fight a pack of wolves with a pocket knife. Commander Lee Hana moved to the communication station, trying to make sense of the chaos of signals filling the airwaves. Most of it was just static now, the electronic screams of dying technology. But buried in the noise she could hear voices. Kythera voices still calling for help that would never come. Then, cutting through the interference, came a transmission that made everyone on the bridge stop what they were doing. The voice was weak and filled with pain, but it spoke in standard, the common language used for interstellar communication. "Unknown vessel, please respond. This is Elder Veltan of the Kythera Council. If you can hear this message, please know that we are grateful someone finally came." Communications Officer Han Yuna quickly worked to clean up the signal and establish a clear connection. Yuna was good at her job, one of the best comm specialists in the exploration service, and within minutes, she had managed to create a stable link to the planet's surface. The face that appeared on their main screen was heartbreaking. Elder Veltan was clearly old even by Kythera standards, his crystalline features cracked and dulled with exhaustion. Behind him, Hana could see the ruins of what had once been a beautiful crystal city. Smoke rose from collapsed buildings and the sound of distant fighting could be heard in the background. "We sent emissaries to every major world in the galaxy," Veltan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The Altarians said they would consider our request. The Zentari promised to send aid when their Senate approved it. The Vegan Confederation told us they needed to study the situation first. 12 different species promised to help us. None came. Only you answered our call." Captain Tejo felt something burning in his chest as he listened to the old alien's words. The Kythera had done everything right. They had followed proper diplomatic channels, made official requests through the correct authorities, and waited, patiently for help that never arrived. While they waited, their entire civilization had been consumed. Han Yuna was working frantically at her station, trying to coordinate with whatever Cathera survivors she could locate. Her fingers flew across the controls as she attempted to establish contact with resistance groups, emergency shelters, and anyone else who might still be alive. "Captain," she said, her voice tight with concentration, "I'm detecting scattered survivor groups across the remaining 2 planets, but the numbers—" She stopped, checking her readings again as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. "What are the numbers, Officer Han?" Taiho asked, though he was afraid to hear the answer. "Sir, I'm detecting maybe 3,000 Cathera left from a population of 12 million, she said quietly. "That's across their entire civilization. 3,000 survivors." The bridge fell silent except for the quiet hum of the ship's systems. 3,000 people. That was all that remained of a species that had existed for thousands of years, that had created art and music and poetry, that had never hurt anyone. Taiho clenched his fists so hard his knuckles turned white. 3,000 souls abandoned by a galaxy that was too civilized, too bureaucratic, too slow to act when speed was the only thing that mattered. While committees met and representatives debated, an entire civilization had been wiped out. "Send a priority burst transmission to Earth Fleet Command," he ordered, his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. "Tell them we have a xenocide in progress and we need immediate military support. Everything they can send." "Sir," Jimin said hesitantly, "Earth Fleet Command is going to want us to withdraw and wait for proper authorization. Our orders are clear about not engaging in combat without approval." Taiho looked around the bridge at his crew. These were good people, professionals who had signed up to explore the galaxy and make contact with new civilizations. They weren't soldiers. But right now, they were the only hope that 3,000 innocent beings had left. "We're not leaving them," he said firmly. "I don't care what our orders say. We're not abandoning these people the way everyone else has." Engineer Seo Junho was lying flat on his back under a massive industrial mining laser, tools scattered around him like surgical instruments. Sweat dripped from his forehead as he worked to rewire systems that were never meant to be weapons. His hands moved quickly and precisely, connecting power cables and targeting systems in ways that would have made the manufacturer's engineers scream in horror. "This is completely insane," he muttered to himself as he spliced together control circuits. Nobody in their right mind would try to turn a rock-cutting laser into a ship-to-ship weapon. But then again, nobody in their right mind would be trying to fight an alien swarm with a single exploration vessel either. The Iron Resolve had been built for peaceful purposes. Its cargo holds were designed to store scientific samples and cultural artifacts, not weapons. Its industrial equipment was meant for setting up research stations and mining operations on uninhabited worlds. Everything about the ship screamed civilian vessel, not warship. That was exactly what made it dangerous. Chief Medical Officer Kim Nari was in the next compartment over, doing something that would have gotten her kicked out of medical school. She was converting the ship's pharmaceutical fabricators to produce industrial chemicals instead of medicine. Her medical training had taught her exactly how different substances affected living tissue, knowledge she was now using in ways that definitely weren't covered in the Hippocratic Oath. "How's the chemical synthesis coming along?" Junho called out as he connected the final targeting relay. "I've managed to create 17 different compounds that should interfere with Vorthak biology," Nari replied, her voice muffled as she worked inside the fabrication unit. "Some attack their nervous systems. Others should disrupt their cellular structure. I have no idea if any of them will actually work, but they're definitely not expecting anything like this." That was the key to their entire plan. The Vorthak weren't expecting anything like what the humans were preparing because no civilized species would ever fight this way. Captain Kim Taiho made his way through the ship, checking on the various conversion projects his crew had undertaken. In the cargo bay, maintenance technician Park Sunho was welding missile guidance systems onto containers that had previously held spare parts. The containers were now packed with mining explosives and scrap metal, creating improvised weapons. That looked like something a desperate rebel would build in a garage. These things are going to be completely unpredictable, Sun-Ho explained as he adjusted the guidance fins. The warheads are different sizes, the guidance systems are mismatched, and the propulsion is jury-rigged from thruster components. There's no pattern for the enemy to figure out. Down in the communications center, Han Yuna was coordinating with Elder Veltan and the surviving Kithara resistance groups. The old alien leader appeared on the screen, his crystalline features reflecting the light of fires burning in the background. "I must warn you about the nature of your enemy," Veltan said, his voice heavy with hard-learned experience. "The Vorthak are not like any opponent you have faced before. They learn from every battle. They adapt to every weapon used against them." He gestured toward something off-screen, and the camera panned to show the wreckage of what had once been a beautiful Kithara defense platform. The metal was twisted and melted, but you could still see the elegant curves that marked it as alien technology. "Our weapons were precise and efficient," Veltan continued. "Our tactics were based on thousands of years of military theory. When the Galactic Council species finally engaged the Vorthak and other systems, they fought with honor and discipline. Predictable honor, predictable discipline." The alien leader's expression grew bitter. Within hours, the Vorthak had analyzed their weapons, adapted to their tactics, and turned their own strengths against them. The more organized and sophisticated the resistance, the faster the swarm learned to defeat it. Pilot Lee Hyunwoo was listening to this conversation while he ran diagnostics on the ship's flight systems. Hyunwoo was young, maybe 28 years old, with the kind of cocky confidence that made him an excellent pilot and occasionally got him in trouble with superior officers. Right now, he was grinning in a way that would have worried his mother. "Good thing we never learned those rules," he said cheerfully as he programmed random flight patterns into the navigation computer. The beauty of the human approach was that there were no rules to follow. Every piece of equipment they were converting had been modified in a completely different way. The weapons they were creating had never existed before, and would probably never be built again. There was no tactical manual for what they were doing, because no sane military organization would ever approve such chaotic methods. The first attack came at dawn, local time on the Kithara homeworld. The Iron Resolve dropped out of hyperspace in the middle of a group of Vorthak bioships, appearing so suddenly that the alien vessels had no time to react. Junho's converted mining laser fired first, cutting through the hull of a bioship like a hot knife through butter. But instead of the clean, efficient beam that the laser was designed to produce, the weapon fired in stuttering bursts of random intensity. Sometimes the beam was weak and scattered. Sometimes it was focused to a point that could cut through battle armor. The Vorthak couldn't predict what was coming next because the humans themselves didn't know. Sun-Ho's improvised missiles launched in all directions, their guidance systems programmed with different algorithms that made each weapon behave differently. Some flew in straight lines, others spiraled randomly, and a few actually turned around and attacked from behind. The warheads were equally unpredictable. Some exploded on impact, others burrowed into the bioships before detonating, and several released clouds of Nari's experimental chemicals. The effect on the Vorthak was immediate and devastating. These creatures had evolved to counter organized resistance. They could adapt to energy weapons, kinetic projectiles, and even exotic technologies within hours of first encountering them. But they had no idea how to deal with weapons that didn't follow any logical pattern. One bioship tried to adapt to the mining laser's frequency, only to be hit by a completely different type of beam 30 seconds later. Another attempted to develop countermeasures against the missile guidance systems, but couldn't create a defense against weapons that changed their behavior randomly. The most effective weapons turned out to be Nari's chemical compounds. The Vorthak biology was incredibly adaptable, but it took time for them to develop immunity to new toxins. By the time they had adjusted to one compound, they were being hit by 3 others that attacked completely different biological systems. For the first time in months, the Vorthak swarm retreated. The bioships that survived the initial attack pulled back to a safe distance, clearly confused by an enemy that didn't fight according to any recognizable pattern. Down on the planet's surface, the scattered Kithara resistance groups watched in amazement as the alien ships that had seemed unstoppable suddenly fled from a single human vessel. Word spread quickly through the emergency communication networks that had been established by the survivors. The message was simple, but carried hope that hadn't existed in weeks. The Firebringers had come, and they fought like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. The hyperspace portal that opened 3 weeks later was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Instead of the neat, orderly emergence of a proper military fleet, ships poured through the dimensional gateway in a chaotic stream that seemed to go on forever. But these weren't the sleek warships that civilized species used for their conflicts. These were working vessels pressed into service, modified beyond recognition and armed with whatever weapons humanity could bolt onto their hulls. Captain Oh Seung-min's flagship had started life as a bulk cargo hauler, the kind of unglamorous vessel that moved raw materials between mining colonies. Now it bristled with missile pods welded to its hull, its cargo bays converted into launch platforms for swarms of attack drones. The ship looked like it had been assembled in someone's backyard, but the weapons it carried were deadly serious. Behind Seung-min came a mining platform that normally extracted asteroids in the outer system. Its massive industrial drills had been converted into close-range weapons that could tear through enemy hulls like paper. The platform's ore processing facilities now manufactured ammunition instead of refining metals. Even its gravity manipulation systems had been weaponized, creating fields that could crush smaller ships or tear larger ones apart. A passenger liner that had once carried tourists to vacation worlds now served as a mobile command center, its luxury suites converted into tactical planning rooms and communication centers. Colony transport ships had been turned into carriers for fighter craft that looked more like racing vehicles than military hardware. Even a deep space research vessel had joined the fleet, its scientific equipment repurposed for electronic warfare and sensor jamming. The Altarian Council observer ship that had been monitoring the situation for weeks transmitted immediately as the human fleet emerged. The Altarians were one of the oldest species in the galaxy, with a military tradition that stretched back thousands of years. They believed deeply in honor, proper procedure, and civilized conduct, even in warfare. Captain Seung-min, came the transmission from the Altarian vessel. I must protest in the strongest possible terms. You are bringing civilian vessels into a combat zone. This violates 17 separate conventions of warfare that Earth has signed. These ships have no business in a military engagement. Seung-min's response was broadcast on an open channel so everyone in the system could hear it. His voice was cold and hard, carrying the kind of anger that came from watching innocent people die while bureaucrats argued about proper procedure. Then don't watch, he said simply. The battle that followed would be talked about in military academies for generations, though not always as an example of what to do. The humans fought with a brutality and creativity that shocked even their allies. Every conventional rule of engagement was not just broken, but completely ignored. Fighter pilot Kim Min-soo led a squadron of converted racing ships in attacks that defied every principle of tactical flying. Instead of maintaining formation and following coordinated attack patterns, each pilot flew independently, making split-second decisions that no computer could predict. Some fighters carried conventional missiles, others were loaded with chemical weapons, and a few were nothing more than piloted bombs designed to ram into enemy vessels. This is insane, Min-soo called out over the radio, as he dove his craft directly into the mouth of a massive bioship. No sane pilot would try this maneuver. He triggered his payload just before impact, and the entire enemy vessel convulsed as industrial acids ate through its internal structure. On the mining platform, weapons specialist Lee Do-hyun was coordinating attacks that would have horrified any civilized military officer. His teams were using mining charges as weapons, but not in any way the explosives were designed for. They packed the charges with radioactive materials, toxic chemicals, and even biological agents created from samples of the Vorthak themselves. We're turning their own biology against them, Do-hyun explained to his crew as they prepared another volley. The medical team extracted samples from the dead bioships and engineered viruses specifically designed to attack Vorthak's cellular structure. It's probably against about 50 different treaties, but it works. Medical Officer Yoon Chae-young was running the most unusual medical bay in galactic history. Half of her equipment was being used to treat wounded Cathara survivors, while the other half was manufacturing biological weapons. She had converted surgical nanobots into attack agents that could infiltrate enemy ships and sabotage them from within. Her pharmaceutical fabricators were producing combat drugs that could keep human pilots conscious through maneuvers that should have killed them. "Captain, I'm monitoring the enemy fleet movements," she reported while simultaneously coordinating the evacuation of Kythera civilians. "The Vorthak are showing behavior patterns I've never seen before. They're actually retreating from multiple engagements. The swarm is fragmenting." This was unprecedented. The Vorthak had never been known to retreat from anything. Their entire strategy was based on overwhelming adaptation and relentless aggression. But they had evolved to counter civilized warfare conducted by species that followed rules and fought with honor. They had no answer for an enemy that used every dirty trick imaginable and invented new ones on the spot. Communications Officer Park Jamin was monitoring enemy transmissions when he discovered something remarkable. "Sir, I'm picking up what appears to be confusion in the Vorthak coordination signals. They're trying to adapt to our weapons, but every time they develop a countermeasure, we hit them with something completely different." The beauty of the human approach was its very unpredictability. The Vorthak could adapt to energy weapons, so the humans used kinetic projectiles. When the enemy developed armor against kinetic attacks, the humans switched to chemical weapons. When the Vorthak started filtering their air systems, the humans began using biological agents. And when all else failed, they simply rammed their ships into enemy vessels and detonated nuclear charges at point-blank range. Engineer Nam Tai-hyung was coordinating the kamikaze attacks from the command ship. His job was to identify volunteers and equip their vessels with the most powerful explosives available. It was grim work, but there was no shortage of volunteers. Every human in the fleet had seen the recordings of what the Vorthak had done to the Kythera worlds. "We have 17 ships ready for final attack runs," Taehyung reported. "Each one is carrying enough nuclear material to sterilize a small moon. The pilots understand this is a one-way mission." "Negative," came a transmission from one of the volunteer pilots. "This isn't a suicide mission. This is pest control. These things killed 12 million innocent people. We're just taking out the trash." The Vorthak swarm, faced with an enemy that refused to follow any recognizable pattern of warfare, began to do something they had never done before. They started to flee. Bioships that had seemed unstoppable began retreating toward the outer system, abandoning their positions and leaving their smaller units to be destroyed. For the first time since the invasion began, the Kythera homeworld was free. The arrival of the Galactic Council's official relief fleet was almost anticlimactic. 6 weeks after the first Kythera distress calls, pristine military vessels finally emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation. Their hulls gleamed with fresh paint and polished metal, their weapon systems hummed with unused energy, and their crews were immaculate in pressed uniforms that had never seen real combat. They arrived to find the war was over. Space around the Kythera homeworld looked like a graveyard. Massive chunks of bioship carcasses drifted between the planets, slowly decomposing in the vacuum. The acidic compounds that had once made up their living hulls were now eating through their own structures, creating bizarre sculptures of decay that sparkled in the light of the system's sun. But scattered among the alien corpses were human ships, battered and scarred but still functioning. They moved slowly through the debris field, their crews working tirelessly to search for survivors and clear safe passages for the evacuation vessels that were ferrying Kythera refugees to temporary shelters. Council Admiral Jextai commanded the relief fleet from his flagship, a massive dreadnought that had never fired its weapons in anger. The Zentoran was tall and elegant, with the kind of bearing that came from generations of military breeding and academy training. His uniform was perfect, his medals polished, and his expression showed the kind of disapproval that senior officers reserved for subordinates who had stepped far out of line. "This is unprecedented," he declared during the first communication with the human fleet. His voice carried across all frequencies, making sure every ship in the system could hear his words. "Captain Tai-ho, you and your vessels have violated numerous warfare protocols. The use of biological weapons, kamikaze tactics, and civilian vessels in combat situations is strictly forbidden under 17 different treaties. Captain Kim Tae-ho stood on the bridge of the Iron Resolve, and he looked like he had been through hell. His uniform was stained with 3 weeks of desperate combat, patched with emergency repairs and smeared with grease from working alongside his engineering crew. His face was gaunt from too little sleep and too much stress, but his eyes burned, with an intensity that made even seasoned officers step back. "We violated your protocols to save lives you abandoned," Tae-ho replied, his voice carrying a cold fury that cut through the Admiral's formal tone like a knife. "Remember that when you draft your reports and hold your hearings and form your committees, to study what went wrong here." The bridge of the Iron Resolve was crowded with both human officers and Kithra survivors who had been rescued during the final evacuation. Elder Velton stood beside the human captain, his crystalline features no longer dulled with despair but reflecting a newfound strength. The old alien leader had spent the last 3 weeks working alongside the humans, coordinating rescue efforts and helping to organize the scattered resistance groups. "Council Admiral," Velton said, his voice carrying clearly across the communication channel, "with respect, your fleet arrives 6 weeks too late. The Council deliberated while my people died. These firebringers acted while you debated procedure. The Kithara will not forget who answered our call when we needed help the most." The silence that followed was uncomfortable for everyone except the humans. They continued their work, ignoring the political drama playing out on the communication channels. Medical Officer Yoon Cha-young was coordinating relief efforts from her converted medical bay, her teams treating both human wounded and Kithara survivors with equal care. "We have medical supplies and temporary shelters set up on 3 different worlds," she reported to anyone who was listening. "The Kithra who want to rebuild their civilization have places to go. Those who want to come with us to human space are welcome. We don't abandon people who fought beside us." Communications Officer Han Yuna was monitoring transmissions from across the galaxy, and what she was hearing made her smile for the first time in weeks. News of the human victory over the Vorthak was spreading through underground networks, resistance, groups and species that had been ignored by the major powers. "Captain," she said quietly, making sure only the human crew could hear her, "I'm picking up transmissions from 17 different systems. They're all asking the same question. If they need help, will the humans come for them too?" The question was being asked on worlds that had been abandoned by their supposed protectors, in colonies that were too small or too poor to matter to the galactic powers, and by species that had been waiting for years for someone to care about their problems. The message was spreading faster than any official communication network could carry it. Engineer Seo Junho was still working to repair the ship's jury-rigged weapon systems when he overheard one of these transmissions. A mining colony on the edge of known space was reporting attacks by unknown raiders. The local authorities had requested help from 3 different council species, but all they had received were promises to investigate and requests for more detailed reports. "Sir," Junho said to Captain Tae-ho, "we're getting another distress call. Some mining colony is under attack and nobody's coming to help them." Tae-ho looked around his bridge at the crew that had followed him into an impossible battle and somehow emerged victorious. These weren't soldiers. They were explorers and scientists and engineers who had risen to meet a challenge that the galaxy's professional warriors had refused to face. "Set course for the mining colony," he ordered. "We have work to do." As the human vessels prepared to depart, other species throughout the system watched in silence. The Council fleet remained in formation, their weapons unused, their crews untested, their purpose unclear now that the crisis had been resolved without them. But the humans were already moving toward the next emergency, the next group of people who needed help, the next situation where someone had to choose between following procedure and saving lives. Word continued to spread through the galaxy's forgotten corners and ignored worlds. In the depths of space, other distress calls waited unanswered by councils and committees and species that preferred debate to action. But now they had new hope, a different kind of answer to their prayers. Someone would come when called, someone who fought with the fury of those who knew what it meant to stand alone against the dark, someone who brought fire to places where the galaxy's light had failed to shine. The fire had been lit, and it would not be extinguished. Across the galaxy, beings who had given up hope began to believe again. Help was coming, and it wore human faces. The age of committees and protocols and civilized delays was ending. The age of the Firebringers had begun,